Hello and welcome to the How We Got Here podcast. It's Kristen and Kelly here, and I am so excited to introduce our guest, Kody Green. Kody is somebody that we just recently met, and honestly, like Kelly and I were joking that it just felt like that we could sit down and like have a cup of coffee with him and his wife and just like hang out and talk all day. But Kody, would you like to introduce yourself to our guests?
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. So my name's Kody Green. I am a schizophrenia advocate, motivational speaker, and content creator. I have been doing content for about 4 or 5 years now. It started off as something I wasn't really anticipating doing. I just wanted to share more about my experience living with schizophrenia and, talk about my past of addiction and incarceration. And what I was going to use as like my own personal self blog became a channel with over 1 million followers. And so I got to start traveling around and telling people about my story and sharing my story with police officers and college students and anyone that mental health is relevant to. And so that's just a bit about how I got started, and I'm excited to jump in and talk with you guys more about mental illness and other things. I know we had talked about addiction and stuff like that as well.
So, Cody, thank you so much for being with us. And we're excited to have a new friendship as well. And just excited to have you here. But obviously, you have a really significant following online, and it's easy to Google you and see a lot of your story, your history, pictures of your life and your beautiful wife and your life out in Wisconsin. But what are some things that folks might not know about you that they can't see if they like Google search you?
Yeah, a lot of my life has been made public, so you can find most things if you Google search me. I do think not a lot of people know that in addition to being a schizophrenia patient, I was also raised by a mother with schizoaffective disorder. And I've talked about that a few different times, but it's not something that is like super obvious when you first learn about me. It's not something that comes up right away. A lot of people probably also don't know that before my psychotic break, I was going to school to be a choir teacher. So, uh,
Wait,
and
do you
so
sing? Are you a singer?
yeah, I did musicals and I did all that fun stuff, and I really enjoyed it. And I just after my everything that happened, it wasn't going to be super easy to do teaching, so I became a teacher in a different way, where I was getting to teach people about mental illness and addiction recovery and stuff like that. So I also, because I live in Wisconsin, when I got out of jail, I took the only job that made sense in Wisconsin. I became a cheesemaker for several years, so that's another thing that a lot of people don't know about me. But in addition to that, I have a couple different. I have two dogs, and I've always had like pets around the house, and so I also hate the winter, but I live in Wisconsin, so so yeah, that's a bit about me that you probably wouldn't find online. Maybe that I hate winter. I do talk about that a lot, actually.
Yeah, I'm not a big winter person either. I'm going to Minnesota on Thursday,
Oh
and
God.
it's
Oh my
just
gosh.
it is what it is at this point. I mean, I'm grateful, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're advocates here and we do what we get to do, but I mean, so you grew up in Wisconsin, is that correct?
Yep. Born and raised.
Are you still
And
in
then
the town that you grew up in, or
no, but not far away. It's like an hour drive. And I probably would have moved somewhere warmer, but I married a Wisconsin girl, so I'm stuck here now.
do you find it I don't know, like I know for me, whenever I go back into my hometown, which I'm not far, I'm like maybe 45 minutes away, it could be not necessarily something that I avoid, but something that can be sort of like a triggering environment for me where if I'm speaking in my hometown or if I'm visiting in my hometown, it's like do you find it difficult or do you find it more healing to be an advocate in your own town?
It can be difficult. The problem with me and where I came from is it's a very small rural town, so it's less than 2,000 people. My graduating class, I think, was 50 people, and so like it's a small area. a little behind the times in understanding mental illness and understanding addiction. And so that's the main reason I don't get to do a lot of that type of advocacy there. I will say though, like, because when I was a kid, I didn't have a personal experience with schizophrenia. I was a caregiver for my mom, so like some of those memories come back. But I actually had my psychotic break in college, and the town I live in now is the town that I lived in when I had my psychotic break. So I do a lot of advocacy here, and to your point, this might be the place that's more in touch with my, addiction background and my schizophrenia background. So um I try to do as much advocacy as possible here. Speaking at the college that I was attending when I had my psychotic break, and talking to police officers here about how to better interact with people with mental illness or addiction. So it's definitely harder, because I know when I talk about those things in other states, it's hypothetical, like this is what could happen if you don't do it. When I talk about it here, it's like these are the things I've literally seen happen in this town to me or other people I know. And so that does, create a different challenge and make it a little more of a raw conversation. But I think it's just as important, if not more, because people can hear these things, and officers who might not have been here when I was, going through my issues, or students who are just now attending the college I went to when I had my psychotic break, that those stories are very impactful to those groups. And so, um, I love traveling and getting out of Wisconsin to speak, but I do a lot here as well.
I feel you there. I recently, a few years ago, moved back to my hometown where I attempted suicide here, and I now work at a high school as I call myself a baby social worker, a high school right next to my high school. And, I
Yeah.
talk to these kids and they're like, "Where did you grow up, Miss Madden?" I'm like, 10 minutes south of here, guys. I'm born and bred here, just like you. And that like moment of connection with those young people when they're like, okay, you've lived it. You know what it's like to feel stuck here. You know what it's like to feel a bit, hopeless, and you know what it's like. And I just appreciate that and empathize with you both about how triggering it can be to go back into those spaces, but also how powerful it can be to reclaim like stepping foot on your college campus again, going back into that classroom and talking to young people who are, oh my gosh, at this point, significantly younger than the three of us, but it is what it is. It is what it is. But yeah, that's a really powerful narrative, and I'm grateful we all share that. In the same vein, I'm wondering, Kody, if there have been any places, even in Wisconsin or of course outside of Wisconsin, that you've traveled to that have been like too tough or too difficult, like speaking engagements, places, communities, or anywhere that's really tested like yourself and like your will and your power and your mental health. I know Kristen and I have had plenty of encounters that, we may have walked out of a school or we're like, I just need to go home. Like, this is not it for me.
Yeah. No, that's a super good question. I've been pretty lucky that I usually am able to manage my emotions and stuff through it. It's usually after the fact that I get kickback and I really feel it hit me. One place was New York City. I took 2 days to just travel around, and I love New York. It's super cool, but the amount of people that are very clearly living with, schizophrenia and suffering with addiction or homelessness, it's super easy to see there, and it's really hard for me. The other is, and not to bag on an entire half of the country, but the South is really hard for like when I go to the South and do speaking events, and not it's not everywhere. I will say that. Some places are getting, a lot better, but the South in general is very resistant to talking about mental health and addiction. They'd rather act like it's not a thing. And I know it's, conservative backgrounds, it's people who these are conversations they haven't had. And so it makes my job very difficult. And I'm sure if you guys have ever spoken in the South, you might know some of that too. But like I've been to Florida, I've been to Texas, and it's very hard to talk about these issues or talk to police officers who don't want to hear it or don't even believe it's a real issue. You know, they believe that mental illness and addiction is some sort of choice that people are making, and that makes it very challenging for me to be there, opening up and sharing my story, what I know the audience thinks these things. And I know every time I've gone there, I get emails afterwards telling me about how, my addiction was a choice and my schizophrenia was just something that, if my mom would have taken better care of me because she was a single mother, just like ridiculous things that make no sense to me. And it all comes back to misunderstanding and miseducation. So like I keep going despite how tough it is every time I go. But this, the same could be said for some of the bigger cities who have the resources for these people, but the sheer amount of people living there makes it hard for them to get to everyone and offer these resources. And so, yeah, I less with my hometown and more with like areas. I've found that it's really challenging for me to go to.
Any type of area that you're like getting out of your element, I think is
Oh yeah.
just like it's a
Mhm.
different ball game. Like, I mean, I'll never forget. Like, it was in Iowa, so like not the South, but
Yeah.
it
It's the
was.
south of the Midwest.
Yeah, it's you're right. It's the South of the Midwest. And I just had a guy tell me, like, can you tell me about the time where you accepted Jesus Christ into your heart? And like, I am by no means like anti, like you do you. Whatever works for
Yeah.
you, I
Yep.
don't really care. As long as you're not harming another person. But I stood there in front of all these parents. I was about to speak to their children the next day, and I was just like, oh, I actually didn't have that experience. And he was like, then why are you here? I don't want you
Oh
speaking,
man.
like, I don't want you speaking to my kids tomorrow. And I
Yep.
was very grateful that, the person who ran the school was very apologetic and was like, he's a problem. But
Yeah.
it's like walking into environments where you don't know anybody. You might not have like your support system. Like, it's just, anything could happen, but you do it for the greater good. And it's like, okay, like if I can at least reach one person, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
that's like where it's at.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's especially in those areas because it's like I hate to say it, but if I'm in an area like that, and I've had that exact scenario where like, religion became like, well, why are you here talking if you don't believe? And I always tell people if it comes up, I try not to have it come up that I'm agnostic, I do believe there could be something. I just don't claim to know what that is. And that doesn't sit well with certain communities. And so it's tough because I know that the students or the people that I'm going to be speaking to might not have someone that they can hear or that they think might understand their story. If all they have is, super religious community and parents and surrounding themselves with people who don't care or don't want to talk about mental illness, my story could be the one that breaks through so that they learn more, like seek out more online or seek out other people. And so, as frustrating and difficult as that is, it's probably one of the more important things we have to do as advocates.
Absolutely agree. I think I work in a rural school district and grew up in a pretty similar, from what it sounds like, Cody, we grew up in very similar towns. And you make eye contact with those young people or those adults in the room who are like, thank you. And they're like
Hmm.
giving you that little signal out of their head, like, thank you for seeing me. Thank you for saying this. Thank you for challenging what's going on in my community. And that makes it all worth it and worth all the travel for sure. To switch gears a little bit, Cody, Kristen and I are on the East Coast and we're over here in New York and Pennsylvania, and you're out in the Midwest. And I feel like a lot of your following is out there, and obviously your community is out there. So, for folks who are listening who might not know a little bit about your story, how did you get here? What is your story? And, of course, share the high points, the low points, whatever you feel comfortable sharing with folks.
Yeah, so I am, like I said, I was raised by a mother with schizoaffective disorder. And for any of your viewers who don't know, schizoaffective disorder is a combination of schizophrenia and a mood disorder, usually bipolar. And so my mom had her psychotic break. Um, she had her psychotic break when I was just getting into high school. And so I was middle school going into high school, and she started having hallucinations, delusions, and she was a single mom. So it was very confusing for us. It was something that, all of a sudden at 14, 15 years old, I'm trying to help her navigate through this. And it took a long time to get her a proper diagnosis, several years to get her the help she needed. And it wasn't until I was about to go off to college that she was finally stable, she was comfortable. And then my first year of college is when I had my psychotic break. And so I had just been helping my mom navigate through all this, and I had a decent amount of education on what schizophrenia was, what it looked like. And that didn't really do me a lot of good because as soon as I fell into it, the delusions took over, and I was no longer uh, I didn't have clarity to understand that that's what was going on, even though I recognized it. I knew what the symptoms were. I had seen it with my mom, and instead of being able to recognize it, I was extremely paranoid. I was delusional, thinking that I had to deal with it myself. Otherwise, if I sought help, I'd be locked up. I had seen my mom institutionalized briefly, and so it was almost like a trauma I was terrified of. And I, instead of seeking help, even though I knew something wasn't quite right, I decided to turn to drugs as a way to self-medicate and try to cope. And all that did was make my symptoms much, much worse. But in the moment, it was giving me very brief moments of clarity. So that's why I continued to do it. It wasn't for a couple years that, I was using and ended up getting incarcerated. And so that was the point where once I was incarcerated, I didn't have, drugs to fall back on. I didn't have the distractions that I had on the outside. And I started recognizing that something was off with me. I didn't know it was schizophrenia. I was still delusional at the time. I didn't have like the clarity to be like, ah, yes, it's the same thing I watched my mom go through, but I knew something wasn't right. And so I started reaching out for help. And unfortunately, the entire time I was incarcerated, I kept asking for help, asking for resources, and got nothing. So it wasn't until I got out that my mom and my now wife were able to pair me up with a doctor who got me immediately into a psychiatrist. And thanks to my mom's journey through mental illness, my diagnosis and treatment and medication came super quick because there is a genetic component to illnesses like schizophrenia, and so that made it pretty easy for them to figure out what was going on for me. And so from there, once I got medicated, I started having a lot of clarity with my antipsychotics. A lot of hiccups though, because it's very common for people with schizophrenia or any mental illness to start feeling better and think they don't need their meds anymore. So I would go off my meds, I would have all these issues like that. And then finally, after, years of trial and error with new meds and everything like that, I decided to start sharing my story in peer support. So I went to local peer support groups. I found online peer support groups. That's how I got connected with NAMI, and that's how I started learning about online advocacy too. And I didn't start doing advocacy right away. I actually my wife started sending me TikToks in like 2019 or 2018, something like that. And I was like, this is the stupidest app I've ever seen. I was like, I refuse to start using this. And then I was like, she kept sending me stuff. So I'm like, I'll tell you what, I'll download it just so I can watch it in the app and not have to watch it in the web browser. And then all of a sudden, you get scrolling, and you're like, "Hey, there's some cool stuff on here." So I did. I started finding comedians. I started finding people sharing their own stories through like addiction recovery and stuff like that. But I couldn't really find anyone doing anything about schizophrenia, so I was like, "I'll just upload a couple stories." And so after a couple weeks of having TikTok, I uploaded my first schizophrenic story time, and that's something I still do today. But it's something that I just literally tell a 1 minute story about an issue or a symptom I've had with schizophrenia. And I went to sleep with 300 followers and I woke up with 10,000 followers. So it just kind of blew up overnight. And then that became, my full-time job. It became, I found that I was super passionate because when I was diagnosed, I felt very alone in a rural area. I didn't have a lot of resources. And so I looked for people that could have similar backgrounds and I couldn't find anyone. So I kind of told myself when I started advocacy that I was going to be the person that I needed in that moment when I was diagnosed. And so that's, it rolled into me being able to, people were reaching out to have me come speak at events. So I started doing that. And then even recently now I started doing stand-up comedy and that's been amazing and so much fun. I'm in the works right now and writing a book. And so it's been unbelievable, life-changing. And even with medication in the last couple years, I made a switch to long-acting injection so I don't have to take daily oral medication. And my life has just become so much more stable, so much more comfortable. And it's just unbelievable what's happened just from social media.
From cheesemaker to
Yeah.
schizophrenia advocate.
Yeah,
That's
that's
it.
but yeah, no, that's it literally was like that that was the entire path and it's weird looking back on because it seems like such a like I can tell that story in a couple minutes, but also that was since 2000 almost 10 years of my life that is me reliving and it doesn't seem like it but it definitely is.
It's crazy how, like, being an advocate, you can just kind of nail down your story in 60 seconds. It's like,
Yeah, you get
this
used to it.
is this is what it is. This is who I am. And
I
you
know the
know,
highlights.
yeah, I mean, that's all you really need.
Yeah.
I don't know, like, I'm a person in recovery. I On Saturday, I'll have 9 years, which is like,
Yeah,
I'm
ooh,
so proud of you.
congratulations, that's awesome.
dude, it's unreal. And like, I still like look back at the times when it was not very pretty and not very nice, and even in sobriety, like having it be difficult. And I've done the thing where I'm like, I don't need medication anymore, and
Hmm.
then my life gets much worse and I'm curious
Yeah,
as to why my life got worse. Or
and
you
then you
know
do it several times and you still can't make the parallel. It's like that
no.
meme with like all the math over your head and you're like,
Yeah,
what is going on here?
how has my life declined? What happened?
I like
And
the
it's,
Spider-Man meme where they're like,
Pointing
yeah.
at each other. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's exactly what it is. And I'm back on my meds. I'm doing great. But I mean, I don't know. I think like sometimes community supports can be extraordinarily helpful and sometimes they can be really hurtful. And
Hmm.
um, even like while being in prison, like you would think that like there's a lot of people that go to prison that struggle with mental illness and that they would have that sort of built into their system of like, okay,
Yeah.
like this is how we're going to support them. And I find it not shocking, but like very upsetting that there was
Frustrating.
no support for you.
Yeah. No,
How do you how did you cope with that?
that was, I think, one of the toughest parts of my journey because I don't know why I kind of anticipated the same thing. And given I was, unwell at the time, so but like it was hard for me to understand what was going on in general, but the majority of people in jails or prisons in America aren't bad people. They're mostly people with severe mental illness or addiction issues that are untreated. That I like out of everyone I met, don't get me wrong, there are bad people. There are bad people who have done bad things, have no remorse, and probably need to be in jail. I would say that's such a small percentage though that it blows my mind. You go to jail thinking that's what everyone is, and you have this idea of like these are all bad people, and I'm getting put in a place with terrible people, and then you get there and you're like, if you're mentally ill or a recovering addict, you're like, oh damn, like that's me, like that's everyone else. It's like we're all kind of navigate, and some of the people don't know it, some of the people don't want to admit it, but you start hearing people's stories and what they've been through and you're like, yeah, this person is probably, has untreated mental illness, or this person is clearly, an addict who hasn't admitted that yet, and so it's really frustrating. And the facilities are so bad, and this, I'm only speaking to the facility I was in, but I've heard this a lot from other people that are prison reform advocates and stuff. the facilities are so bad that other inmates will actually tell you not to go there. If you have severe mental illness or like something like that, they'll tell you, they'll be like the psych facilities or the wherever the wards that they have for people with like severe mental illness are apparently have worse conditions, have like worse treatment from guards, and so like people will tell you not to go. So when I went in, I actually had other inmates looking out for me because they were like, we want to make sure that they don't realize that Kody is unwell, or they're going to put him, in these different wards for people with severe mental illness. And apparently the
Wow.
conditions were so bad that they like other inmates would tell you you're better off staying in like population with everyone else. And that blew my mind. I'm like, I'm in a government funded facility. You're telling me there's no good resources here? Like, and that's it. To this day, I still don't get it.
No, it's like, where are my where are my taxes going? Not
A
there,
Yeah,
system
clearly.
yeah,
is broken. The
it
system is
is.
always broken.
Well, and it's such a shame too because it and I could talk all day about my hatred for for-profit prisons and stuff like that, but I think they're really ruining a lot of it because um there could be such good resources. Like we can statistically prove that jails and prisons mostly hold recovering addicts and mentally ill people. Like we can prove that on paper. So at that point, why don't we put in place different things for people to have resources not only while they're in there, but packets of information of what resources they can find when they get out. Like we have these people who have unfortunately ended up in jail, and I don't think it should get to the point where they end up there. But if we're not going to change that from the outside, then what we could at least do from the inside is make sure that people have all of the resources they need, have all of the information they need when they get out so they can find jobs, find housing, reduce the recidivism rate, find peer support. Like it could be so easy if we were just able to implement a few things across the board, but it does get harder from what I understand because of for-profit prisons. They don't have to have the same rules and regulations, and like even if they implemented some of those things for state-run facilities, I don't know that they could implement a lot of them in for-profit facilities. So just a whole nother thing I could talk literally forever about.
Hi, everyone. We took a little bit of a break there. Excited to jump back in with Kody. Kody, you mentioned earlier that you've gotten into stand-up comedy, and personally, I love seeing your videos and reading about when you have comedy gigs on your social media. I know you faced a little bit of pushback about being both a mental health advocate and exploring comedy and how that's like an outlet for you. And I'm curious to hear more about like how that's helped your self-care and been a great outlet for you, but also curious to hear kind of like I guess a little bit about the pushback you've been getting in our mental health advocacy community.
Yeah, the pushback is something I anticipated and expected. And when you spend 10 years of your life getting shit talked about you by hallucinations, you just it's fine. I'm over it. You get used to it. No, but on a more serious note, it is something that I've been super passionate about because um, early on in TikTok, I found that by using comedy or tying humor into my videos, I was reaching an audience who otherwise probably never would have looked into schizophrenia or mental illness, because it is a tough topic. It is, it's still a very stigmatized issue. And so a lot of people they want to keep it at an arm's length and they don't want to bring it up and have it be something that they address. And with comedy, I was able to get some of these people in the door just enough where they started asking questions and wanting to learn more about my illness and other mental illness. And so it's to me a no-brainer. Like Gen Z and millennials love dark humor. They love tying their experiences into something that they can laugh about because, as you know, my psychiatrist always says, if you don't laugh you'll cry, and I took that very to heart. So comedy was such a natural move for me, and it was something I didn't really even think about I was at an event that had an open mic night, and they were like, Kody, would you like to try it? And I took literally 5 minutes to write some stuff down. The response was amazing. And I was like, I have all this content, really good content about, my experiences. And yes, a lot of it is traumatic and a lot of it I would never talk about in a comedy setting, but there's a lot of it that's also super funny. So it was like, uh, it's like I would be like talking to my psychiatrist or my counselor, and they'd be like, it's really you've been through a lot, but it's super funny. You should talk about it. And so I was like, all right, yeah. So I did this one open mic thing, and the response. It was so weird because I do so much motivational speaking. I've been doing it for years. And when you do motivational speaking, especially about addiction or mental illness, it brings up a lot. It brings up, it like re traumatizes you a little bit. Um, and I understand that's important and I still love it. I'm still passionate about it. But doing comedy allows me to spread the same message, get people to understand schizophrenia better, and do it in a way that's more freeing to me and less restrictive and less traumatizing. And so, to me, it was a no-brainer. And I did get a lot of pushback. And that shocked me. I had people unfollow me, and I had people who were very upset because they're either they have a friend or family member living with schizophrenia and they thought I was being insensitive. I will say most of the people who were upset about it did not have a friend or family member with schizophrenia, and they themselves were not schizophrenic. So I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but it does play into the conversation of people really like going outside of their own comfortability to be uncomfortable for someone else. And I'm like, to me, comedy is how I cope. It always has been. This is just me actually pursuing stand up. I've always done comedy. It's always been a part of my videos, from the very like first videos. Even my some of my first schizophrenic story times were me telling funny stories of like living with hallucinations. And so for people now to be upset confuses me because I'm like, well, if you've been following me for a long time, you know that that's how I cope. It's the first time I've got on stage and done it in actual stand-up format, but that's always how I've done things. And so I think for some people, it's just going to take a little bit of time for them to see the impact that it has. I'm reaching even more people now. So I started doing stand-up, and I'm reaching, once again, people who probably never would have had these conversations. I was at a comedy club the other day doing a setup or doing a stand-up performance, and I had a lady come up to me afterwards and she said that her cousin had schizophrenia and that her family never talked about it. She never looked into it. And she was fascinated by my story and she said she was going to go learn more about it. And she was so curious about like what I had talked about. And that was just me making the dumbest jokes about it. And like, so there is, I think, a way for me to use this and still be an amazing advocate. And I think, I don't mean to sound entitled or selfish, but I think I've earned that. I think I've earned the ability to address my illness in a way that's also comfortable for me and allows me to, instead of re-traumatizing myself, kind of work through some of the things I went through, being incarcerated, being someone struggling with addiction, and someone being undiagnosed with schizophrenia in a rural area. Like I should have that ability. And so I'm super passionate about it. And regardless of what the people who dislike it say and what, my hallucinations might say, I'm gonna do it. So
No, 100%. Like, it's your story. It's your life.
yeah.
It's like agency, right? I make a ton of jokes. I'm kind of funny. I think I'm funny. My friends think I'm funny, but like, it's a way of coping. Like,
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know if I would be alive if I couldn't laugh at
A
like
100%.
the things that have happened to me. Like, if I were serious 100% of the time, I truly don't know if I would be the person that I am today. Like with my friends, like I'll joke and like there's always that one person that's like
Oh yeah.
you
You shouldn't
shouldn't
joke
joke
about
about that. And it's like, well, and it'll be like I mean, listen, like professionally, like when I am speaking with an organization, I'm like very vulnerable and serious and like
Oh, absolutely.
I'll
Yeah.
say a couple jokes, but like more or less like jokes that I've talked
Just to
about.
break the ice a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, but like when I'm talking with my friends, it's so much different. Like, being a trauma survivor, being someone like my mom was very mentally ill, suffered with addiction, took her own life. Like, and when I make jokes about it, like people won't know my history and they'll be like, you shouldn't joke about that. And I'm like, oh, why? And they're like, you don't know who could be struggling with that or
Yeah.
who has struggled with that. And I'm like, my mom killed herself. And they're like, oh, I didn't
Yeah.
know that. And I'm like, yeah. So
I've gotten to the point with stand up. I've realized that if I don't announce that I'm schizophrenic and an addict right when I walk up, people they'll hold back, you know? If I tell people that, they're like, "Oh, free game," you know?
well, you
But
give
it's
them
like
you give them permission. You give them
yeah,
permission to
exactly.
laugh with you, to understand with you. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's so to me absolutely freeing, and I joke about it, but honestly, like I don't know that millennials or Gen Z were taught to cope any other way. So it's like I think that's the only thing I got. That's the only bow in my in my quiver. So that's what I use.
I think it just reminds folks, like, I love to make jokes, especially when I'm up on a stage at a school and I'm like, guys, I'm bipolar. You don't know what's like coming next. And the kids are like, and then there's
Yeah,
one kid that laughs and one teacher that laughs, and they're like, okay, I can laugh. But like, it
yeah,
gives folks a sense of community, like to know, like, this stranger just got up on the stage and was like, I'm schizophrenic and I'm an addict. I can own what's going on for me too. Like,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah. Well, and that's kind of the whole idea behind the comedy venture. Like I want to continue doing my speaking. Like I said, I am looking into publishing a book now, and so I have a lot of cool things going that are very professional and very straightforward. But also, I don't want it to be that I can't ever express myself in this way. So, I'm going to continue to pursue both, and I know there are people that won't like that, and I've had to just kind of come to terms with that. I'm a people pleaser, and I need to be better at being like, hey, this is for Kody. So this is one of those things where I'm really, stepping out of my boundaries because I know that people are uncomfortable with it. And I should say this too, a minority, a very small percentage of my followers have reached out. And it's like I said, it's not usually patients, it's not usually caregivers. Those people are probably my most supportive group when it comes to comedy. It's usually people who, don't have any ties to schizophrenia. They just think I'm being insensitive for absolutely no reason. So I do understand where some of that comes from. I don't want people to think that's my goal, and so that's why I go out of my way to explain that on social media. Like, hey, I can do both comedy and still be able to be an effective, not just a motivation, but an effective motivational speaker. And for those who don't believe that, come see me speak sometime because I guarantee you'll have a different mindset when you see me do comedy or you see me do motivational speaking. And I think I'm making an impact with both. And that's the goal.
Yeah, you just had me think about you said that you're an impactful motivational speaker, and I really like that. Like it just reminds me of the times where like I speak to so many people all over the place and I speak to strangers, but there's only like a few select people that I'll be like, "Hey, you want to come hear me speak?" And then like they
Yeah.
come hear me speak and it's like even more intimate and even more special because it's something that's so important in my life personally. Do you have like people in your life that are specifically supportive to you that you hold very close to the vest? Like how have those people been, I guess, integral in your process?
So I always use this tangent to talk about my wife, and I'm going to, but first I got to talk about my mom. So my mom, like I said, was someone who was diagnosed when I was a kid. She unfortunately went undiagnosed much longer than me, and that had a lot of cognitive effects on her. So she is disabled full time, even with medication. And she is a warrior. She has been through so much. She raised two kids while struggling with addiction and mental illness. When she finally got well a couple years ago and she was doing much better, she got diagnosed with breast cancer and she beat that. So this woman is an unstoppable force. and she is one of my biggest supporters. She always has been. And so I'm just so lucky that Mama Green's been there to help me through all of my stuff and be able to help me navigate, my illness and be able to ask her questions about symptoms and hallucinations and delusions and try to have a better understanding of it. If it wasn't for her helping me educate myself about schizophrenia and being aware that I could eventually also, develop schizophrenia, I don't know that I ever would have got the help that I did or realized that something was wrong with me in those like brief moments of clarity. Um, and then the other person is my wife, who, um, I don't think I've mentioned while we've been talking, but for those of you who don't know the background with my wife, we met in high school when I was like 15. We didn't start dating until I was 17. She was my date to senior prom, and so we've been together ever since. 5 days ago, we just celebrated our 12-year anniversary. So it's been insane. And about a year and a half into dating me, my wife watched me go through a psychotic break out of nowhere. She was in college. I was just going off to college. I was very excited about pursuing teaching and doing all that. And then all of the sudden, I was delusional. I was paranoid. I had to drop out of college. I started using drugs, and she didn't really understand what was going on. She stuck with me through all that, through my addiction, through the incarceration. She could tell it wasn't me, and she did everything she could to get me the help. And that didn't happen overnight. Like, I talk about this, and people are like, "Oh man, that's crazy." I think they are under the impression this was like a brief. This was a couple years that she watched me struggle with, addiction and mental illness that went completely untreated. And she let me know she was worried. She asked me if I needed help, and I kept refusing any sort of assistance or help because I was delusional and I didn't think anything was wrong with me. And she was able to kind of be there for me until I finally got out of jail, and I reached out and I was like, "Hey, I think something's wrong. I don't know what it is." And she had all the resources ready to go. She got me into a doctor right away because she knew how delusions worked. She made sure that as soon as I reached out, I was in to see someone immediately, and that's why my treatment went so quickly. She was also, because you were asking about speaking, my mom does travel with me, or doesn't travel. She's seen me speak a couple times online, but she's never traveled with me. I'll never forget my first speaking event I ever did. I got reached out to by a local college about, I want to say it was like 4 years ago now. And I went to go speak there. I didn't have it scripted or anything. I just wanted to kind of tell my story. That's what they wanted. They wanted me to just give a rundown of my story. I had about an hour to speak. She came just to record it for me. And I'll never forget, I got done and she was just sitting there. She's like, "I think you could do this. Like, just, I think this could be what you do." And social media hadn't really taken off. I was doing a little bit on social, and that's how like I got offered the gig to do that locally. But it meant so much because I was so nervous. I was at the time not as articulate. Schizophrenia medication really affected my cognitive ability, my ability to communicate things effectively. And so I told my story in what I felt like was a jumbling mess. And she was like, "I think you could do this just as a career. I think you could help people better understand it." And that was insane to me. And I probably wouldn't have kept doing it if it wasn't for that. Because even going back and watching that first speech, I hate it. I hate watching. I don't like watching myself talk a lot in general, but I disliked it so much because I was like, man, I said a lot, all the little things speakers don't like. And to me, that was a big deal. If I had watched that and I didn't have her there, I don't think I would have kept doing it. But she was like, she kind of talked me through it. She was like, despite, you tripping up here and there, you told your story so well and it impacted so many people. And you could tell by the way that they asked questions and the questions they asked. So if it wasn't for her, I probably wouldn't have kept doing it. And that was like the biggest amount of support. She even on one year during our anniversary, our wedding anniversary, she agreed to travel with me to do a speaking event because we wanted to obviously be together for our wedding anniversary, but she also didn't want me to miss this event. So I couldn't say more about her support through all this, and just unbelievable the amount of unconditional love from a person. I couldn't believe it.
I love that. I hope I know both of you are obviously married in serious relationships. When I grow up, I want to find someone like that, Kody. No, no, that's beautiful. And as the three of us know, and everyone knows, your support system is the most integral piece. I feel like in recovery from anything, it's who's around you, who's uplifting you, who is pushing you to get help when you need it. And when you're finally ready to get help, who's there to hold your hand as you walk through that. So
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
beautiful. It's beautiful. I love it. Kristen, do we have anything else left?
I guess the only thing that I really want to say is just expressing my gratitude for you being on our new baby podcast. It's the whole purpose of us doing this is that, Kelly and I, we've talked about it before. We're storytellers. I mean, I've been doing it for almost 8 years. And we get the opportunity to like share. And even though you do have your platform, it is important for like different perspectives to be shared. And whether it's somebody that we just like end up bumping into at an event or somebody that we cold call like you, it's it's a cool thing to just be able to like have an hour where we connect with somebody that we wouldn't normally be able to do that. So just thank you for everything. Thank you for sharing. Before we sort of wrap up here, I want to hear about your book. Like, what is this?
Oh yeah.
What's
uh
going on there?
So I have, weirdly enough, a couple in the works. One of which is one that I've been working on personally. The other one is one that I can't say a lot about because a publishing company has reached out to me about it. But the one that I've been working on is it's called Mentally Ill Influencer. It's literally just about using social media as a force of mental health advocacy and as a way to spread good messages because as we all know, the internet has its flaws, and I think finding the best way to utilize it is, the best thing we can do as not only advocates but as humans. Being able to take this amazing thing and use it for the good it was intended, and not for the mess that it turns into a lot of the time. So that's the one I've been working on myself, and then I have a publishing company that reached out to me about writing one on a specific topic, and then once I'm finished with those, I'm also already drafting. So the ill influencer book is basically done. It's going through editing processes now, and I've already started writing another one. So I potentially have three books on the line, and it's just a matter of like the two are probably going to be self-published unless I find someone interested in them, and that's kind of the process I'm going through right now with editing and all that. But the one is about using social media. The other one is going to be actually about comedy. So it's going to be specifically about using comedy as a coping mechanism and what that can look like and how that can impact not only you but how you tell your story.
I love it. We'll be some of the first folks to buy copies for sure. And I'm excited to hear about your other one that's under wraps and in the
Yeah.
works. And before we close out here, Kody, I just want to ask, where can people find you, follow you? Can they see you perform comedy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So comedy, I'm really trying to get out there, and I'm coming to a state near you if I can help it. Okay, that one's gonna be usually right now it's in Wisconsin, but as we talked about earlier, I'm always looking for reasons to get out of Wisconsin. So hopefully I'll be traveling more for that, and I'll start releasing dates like that on the Instagram page, Kody Green Comedy. But all of my other social media platforms are Schizophrenic Hippie on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. I also do two different podcasts. I do the Unseen and Unheard podcast. That is specifically about people with schizophrenia talking with other patients and other advocates. And then me and my wife started a podcast called Neuro Blend, where we have conversations about neurodivergence over coffee. So it's been really interesting, a lot of fun. I know we didn't have a whole lot I didn't talk about this much with her, but through her own journey, she was recently diagnosed on the autism spectrum and then also with ADHD. So we're excited for her to kind of jump into her own form of advocacy here with the podcast. And yeah, so that's pretty much everywhere where you can find me, but you can also look up dates for speaking events on codygreen.com or you can look up dates for comedy events on codygreencomedy.com.
Fabulous.
Yay. Thank you
Thank
so much,
you.
Yeah.
Cody.
Thank you
It's
guys
been
for
a
having me.
joy. We can't wait to connect with you and your wife in the
Yep.
future and talk more off the books as well. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much.